Well, welcome everyone to the webinar sponsored by NAIFA's YAT program. My name is Emily Cabbage. I am the Director of Marketing at NAIFA, and under that umbrella falls our Young Advisors team, or our YATs as we like to call them. And today we're going to be talking about everything that you want to know about virtual meetings, but we're too embarrassed to ask. And we've got a panel of 4 YATs that are very excited to share their knowledge and experience with that. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a poll. And if you guys just kind of want to answer this quick question as far as where your technology level is, that will kind of help us to better understand where our participants are in their virtual comfort level. So let me do that. Give a couple seconds here. I'll give about 30 seconds if you guys want to take that poll. And again, this is using some of the basic features. So we're kind of doing this in practice to get everybody used to it. Got just about everybody. Okay, so looks like you know, kind of got some good things. Nobody says I avoid them, so that's great. Glad to hear that. And but let me just show you that you are not alone when it comes to navigating the technology. This is a YouTube video that's gone viral. Let me just share that here.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to
can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
I can see that. I think if you click the up arrow next to this.
So just a little humor to get things started. It's a classic video that went viral, but if you hear of anybody say I'm not a cat, that's what they're reading.
It never gets old. It's so funny. I laugh every time.
Yes. So, okay, well, without any further ado, let me introduce our panelists. We've got Derek Sheets out of Ohio, Rebecca Schlueter out of Tennessee, John Hansbrough from LA.
Los Angeles.
Yeah, I was like, LA, he's in Santa Ana right now. And Kate Sheehan out of Denver. So, so just kind of get things started. What are some of the best practices and fundamentals that every virtual meeting attendee should do? You know, camera angle, lighting, that sort of thing. So Rebecca, why don't you talk about what your experience is?
Sure. So I mean, as all of us have been on numerous Zoom meetings the past year and a half, I've been on a lot that people do really well. And then I've been on some where, the camera angle is, coming from under here, like looking up their nose. So sort of best practices I like to start with is lighting, space, like declutter your space. And if not, there are blur filters available for your background. You can do virtual filters. If you are like me and your 3-year-old woke you up in the middle of the night for fun, then there are these little enhanced filters that you can use that kind of hide the dark circles. Derek knows what I'm talking about. He's got a new baby. So just things like that. If you're in a large meeting, you can mute people on entry. I think, we've probably all been in meetings where somebody's talking, we can't figure out who it is, but it's very distracting. So just things like that, that we kind of start with the basics and then move on.
Yeah, and if I may piggyback off of that, it helps to look at yourself via the camera before you jump into a meeting so that you know what your background looks like, you know what you look like, you know what the lighting is. For instance, I was in and I was ready to present like this, but as you can see behind my shoulder is a window. Even though the blinds are shut, it still is bright enough to take away from some of the lighting from my face. So I rotated 45 degrees. That's all it took for that video to look much clearer. So with that, I'll pass it back.
And Derek, that's a good point too, because when the Zoom box pops up initially for you to join the meeting, it kind of does show you, like Derek said, that little preview, and then you can wait until it's kind of just how you like it to say join with video. And then if you're also, and the other thing too is that if you're not presenting and you're just a participant and you're having a totally off day and you're home because you're sick, you can always just join it without video and have your picture. Does everyone know how to get their picture up there as part of their profile?
To be honest, Kate, I feel like that's something you should share.
Okay, so in your Zoom profile, there's some settings that you go to. It looks like a little gear, like a little dial. And up there is where you'll be able to take a picture from your desktop to, or like any file that you have, to upload that as part of your Zoom profile. So when I do that for my Zoom account. So when I log into Zoom and open it up, that's where I do that. It has to be your own account, not just someone that's invited you to a meeting, if that makes sense. So I just use my headshot for that, so that if I am having a terrible day, I can just look like that, my retouched photo, and people can just hear my voice still.
Yeah, but Kate, that's a good point, because I think even if you have it set up in your account, I know I struggled with this when we first started, is if I would go on somebody's, if you don't have the app open on your desktop, it still won't go over. So because I have the app open, this is not my meeting, I didn't start this meeting, but when I do it, mine shows up too. If you don't have the app open on your desktop, then it's not going to work. It's still just going to give your initials. So that's important too. So I would take the extra time to download that app. And then there's extra filters, all kinds of stuff on there. So just another little trick that honestly I just learned like 3 months ago. So
yeah, and I think like the why we're all talking about this is because I think Zoom is here to stay. I think all of us have recognized, I think all of us have probably felt this from a lot of our clients. We're doing a lot of things virtual moving forward. I'm in Los Angeles, I'm in Santa Ana. I've got clients in Las Vegas, I've got clients all over. It's really helpful to not have to be physically with them. Yes, there's some benefits to that. There's always different clients, that we'll want to be in person with for whatever reason. That's just what we have to know as producers in terms of relationship management. But we can accomplish a lot virtually. And so we have to keep in mind then, what are we doing? What are we presenting? How are we coming across? Because if we're in person, I've got my, suit on or business casual, whatever it is, I'm shaking hands, I'm looking eye to eye. There's all of those things that are components that I'm thinking about when I'm going to a meeting in person. Virtually, we're doing all that just through the camera. And so it's really important that we consider these things and we develop an eye for assessing how we're going to come across, what is going to be our first impression, because it makes a really big difference. And I see this actually most generationally in a Provisors group that I'm in. Provisors is just a business networking group of different people. Mine is a lot of attorneys and a lot of older attorneys. And so it's interesting to see the differences in how comfortable they are digitally and what they're coming across as, because some of them, like you said, it's like the camera is like, laptop sitting on their lap, and it's like I'm looking up and I can like count their nose hairs and I can like see the rolls in their neck. And I mean, it's like, I don't know, they're an IP attorney. Sure, I'm probably going to still keep that in mind, but it does make a difference in how I understand and take an impression of them. And so for us as producers, we're trying to make good impressions. We're trying to come across as professional. Managing that impression, how we come across, is very important. Obviously, we need to have good things to say. That's part of what we do. But the other part of it is how we come across. And so that's why it's really important to take this stuff seriously, because it is your first impression on a lot of clients and prospects.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, John, you touched on a really good point that, the pandemic has changed the way that everybody has done business, but it has opened up a door to new ways to do things. So what normally you would have had you out of the office for maybe a total of 3 hours between your commute back and forth to the office, the appointment with the client. Now, all of a sudden, you've got more time in your day and you can get more appointments. So there's no doubt that that platforms like this are here to stay. So I'm wondering, how do you currently use virtual meetings in your practice? And kind of as a second part of that question, why will you continue to use virtual meetings in your practice? So Derek, I'll let you be the first to answer that question.
I was on mute. Thank you for that, Emily. That is something that an experienced Zoom person should know. But the nice thing with Zoom is it does let you know if you're muted right away. But anyways, getting back to it, I was thinking back to March of 2020 and my first time using Zoom. I was being 33 years old, you would expect me to be relatively technologically savvy, but I'm not. And it's pretty straightforward. You follow the prompts and it gets you to where you want to be. So starting in March of 2020, I started to host virtual lunch and learns, virtual meetings, virtual education sessions, virtual roundtables, all these different types of events. And it's funny thinking back to it, I was scheduling more in March and April of 2020 than I was in March and April of 2019. And the reason for that is, again, going back to Emily's comment on the commute and meeting clients and servicing and all these different things, it cut down on a lot of different time. And it took me from an hour total of commuting to 0. And I was able to, again, host, schedule, and attend more of these virtual meetings. And many of them were productive. Again, going back to March of last year, these types of things, it was hard for people to get used to. It's really hard to conduct business virtually if you don't know what you're doing. So the first 2 months for me was really trial and error, trying to figure out what's the best way to go about this. How can I read body language when I can only see the top half of someone's body? But what I've learned is I'm not the only one in that boat. In fact, most of my clients feel very similar to how I feel, where they weren't comfortable at first, but then when things just continued down that virtual line, they became more comfortable. And now people are encouraged to use Zoom. And I have a case in point that it's an everyday thing for me. I'm down at the Ohio State Dental and Medical School very, very often. That's a 30-minute commute for me each way. And depending on who I'm meeting and where I'm meeting them or what presentation I'm giving, I may have a 20 to 25-minute walk in between some of those meetings as well. So there's a lot of downtime. I have been able to schedule and keep more meetings with the same group, the dental and medical professionals, and I'm able to do it more often. In fact, I meet with some of these clients, 2-3 times a month for 15 minutes, as opposed to having a 1-2 hour long meeting. It's easier to get things done because a lot of the processes with financial advising take steps. It's not something that you just sign here and we're done. There are a lot of ins and outs when it comes to that process. So I am very grateful that we're able to get back out there, but at the same time, I am beyond thrilled that Zoom is and will continue to be the best and easiest way to get in front of people. And I just saw Bill made a comment and that really hit home. I'm trying to recall the exact number. It's 20 to 25 medical clients in the past 12 months. 19 of them are now outside of the state of Ohio. That to me initially was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? How am I going to meet them? Well, at the end of the day, it's no different than meeting someone that lives downtown Columbus. I am able to host these meetings and be just as productive virtually as I was when I was going to physically meet with them. Now, with that being said, a lot of times, and John mentioned this earlier, there are times where people really do want to meet in person, which is great as well. So what we've also been doing is transitioning from these lunch and learns and dinner and learns to one-on-one coffee conversations. And those coffee conversations are not always at a coffee shop. They're virtual a lot of times too. It's really easy for someone to just sit down and get together for 15 to 20 minutes and just elaborate on what's going on in their world. Again, it's been a fantastic process. I'm really thrilled that the technology side of things has made it easier for someone like myself, who again is not extremely technologically savvy, especially for being a millennial. But when you start to do this, it seems like after the poll, most people are comfortable with Zoom. Well, we're going to get into a little bit more of the details and some of the more, I guess, fun stuff that Zoom has. And hopefully you guys leave this conversation knowing a little bit more and being a little more comfortable in your next Zoom meeting.
Eric, didn't you say that when you first started, you have an older business partner and his comfort level really wasn't where yours was, so you guys kind of rehearsed, didn't you? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Rebecca,
too?
thank you for that reminder. I have a business partner. He's 64 years old. He's a very, very bright guy, but he is even worse with technology than me, which is hard to do. So again, going back to March of 2020, he had no idea how to even log into a Zoom meeting. So we got together. I showed him how to log in, which was fine. But then what we would do before every single meeting over the next couple of weeks is the two of us would log in 15 minutes early and we would share screens. So I would teach him how to share his screen. I would teach him how to change his video, how to mute himself, how to change his background, all these different things. And by the end of March, actually, I was probably more mid-April, he was running meetings on his own. And I would sit there and attend, but I'm confident with the process. And if someone that had no idea how to run a virtual meeting can do it as efficiently as Rich, then I'm confident that each and every one of you can do that as well.
Yeah, I would say, so following up on that, it is definitely interesting, like how we can use it for doing things. So for me, the majority of my practice is employee benefits. And so we, instead of going to client, facilities and client offices and whatnot last year for open enrollment season, we did it all virtually. And that was really cool because we were able to have these conversations with employees, usually when they were at home, potentially with their spouse, with their husband or wife. They were able to be, a little bit more present. We were able to record those meetings and then share them with them afterwards. And we're able to directly share links and things like that so they can go in and say, hey, here's your open enrollment platform, click into it right now, and you can do this in the next 10 minutes. So it made a lot of that communication, I think, actually a lot easier. And frankly, for some of our higher touch clients, I think we'll still get back to doing some in-person presentations. But for a lot of our groups, okay, I've got to drive 45 minutes to go give a presentation to 10 employees somewhere. It might be a little bit easier, especially when I'm in a busy season, to just do that virtually. It makes it a lot easier for those groups to have that. One thing that I would say is kind of a funny thing about sharing screens is that, part of what I'm always trying to learn stuff. And so I downloaded this really cool Google Chrome extension called Toucan. Toucan converts your pages that you're looking at on Google Chrome into some other language so you can practice reading other languages and developing that, right? So keep in mind, whenever you do stuff like that and you share your screen, people then can see that. So I have had that before where I share my screen with a client and they're wondering why like half of the page is in Spanish. So little things like that, just good to be aware of. But just keep in mind, everything that's on your screen is available. And so one thing that you can do there is, let's say you're sharing like a life insurance ledger, like a life insurance illustration. Well, you probably have multiple screens going. So instead of sharing a screen, you can share that specific window. So that way, if you get an email pop-up that says, blah, 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 got declined because of their cancer or something, that's not going to suddenly be presented to a prospect or another client. And so that's an easy way that you can control.
You can also turn off notifications. I've done that sometimes too, where you can go into Outlook and actually just turn, or whatever, email platform you use, and turn off your notifications. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, John.
Nope, that's cool. I was actually good. I'm done.
Well, I think to John's point too.
I do employ.
Sorry, go ahead, Kate.
No, I was just saying, we do employee benefits too, and we've had the same thing. I work with my father, who is going to be 75 in about 2 weeks. And so the first employee benefits meeting we had, he was like this. He was like combing his hair, checking it out, and then he like stood up and turned around, and I was like, oh. So I, as the host, can also have the functionality to stop his video. So if you are hosting a meeting like that and you see someone doing something inappropriate, I don't know, picking their nose or something, you have the control and the power to be like, to go into the control panel and do that. So that's something that you should know how to do too if you are hosting a meeting.
Yeah, and I think just to piggyback on both of those things too, I think sometimes, we've come across where the client will send the calendar invite and they'll use their virtual platform. I mean, right now we're all on Zoom. I think I'm most comfortable with Zoom, but it can be a little bit anxiety inducing if they're like, hey, I'll just send out the calendar invites because they have, all the employees' contacts, and then you're using Teams or WebEx or something else. So I think a good rule of thumb is to kind of, they're all basically the same, but a good rule of thumb is to kind of familiarize yourself with what the functionality is, so that if you're doing the presenting on somebody else's platform, you know how to share your screen, how to mute and unmute yourself, things like that. So it's just a kind of a good rule of thumb to look at multiple platforms, even if you use one primary one.
I would say too, like, so this always makes me think about growing up. One of the biggest fights I'd always see my mom have is with our remote controls for the TV. Like, I don't know if anyone else was in that boat, but my mom she would get so mad at the remote controls we had. And, as a kid, you're like sitting there thinking, that thing's really stupid. It's just it's
You are smarter than
performing
her.
functions based on what you're telling it to do. And so take your ego out of it. For some reason, the buttons you're hitting are getting that result. So work backwards. You got to hit different buttons. Like, if you get into a car, you can figure out how to drive a car because every car has a start, it has an accelerator, it has a brake, it's got turn signals. Like, every car has the same basic functions. They're just wrapped up in a different wrapping paper. Zoom, Teams, GoToMeeting, whatever they are, they're all the same thing. There's always some way to share your screen, some way to mute yourself, some way to mute others. They all have a lot of those core basic functionalities. And I've had that before. Like, my best client, like, they wanted it to be on Teams. Well, we don't use Teams internally, but we're presenting now to a lot of like high level people. Well, okay, whatever. We're just sharing our screen and we're muting and muting ourselves. It's not very, they're always going to have that same functionality. So just like, be calm. If you're in a little bit of a pinch, think rationally. There's going to be the same functions. They're just maybe places that you're not as aware of because you're used to using another system.
And I did notice too, one time I had to do a Google Meet, and for some reason the default was my rear camera. So I use a tablet for my meetings, just as my main computer, and I had to make sure that it was catching the right camera. Otherwise it was like showing the back of my office instead of my face. So there's all sorts of little different nuances. So I think just planning and preparation. And so maybe I'll transition into making the most of your meeting, if that's okay. Does anyone else have anything to add? So I think in making the most of your meetings, it really does come down to preparation. And John had a good point too. If you're getting on a different platform that you're not familiar with, make sure you get on a little early, using the cameras and all that stuff, and making sure your audio is clear. I have my earbuds in today just because there's some background noise, and so I wanted to make sure that everyone could hear me clearly. So I think it's also a best practice to use calendar invite for a virtual meeting so that everyone's on the same page. This meeting, I actually live in the mountain time zone. I call it the forgotten time zone. No one ever talks about us. We get no love. It's always like East and West Coast. But I happen to be traveling right now, so I'm in the central time zone. So, if you have a calendar invite, it should automatically update to make sure that you're in the right time zone. Recording the meeting too. So like John said, for any people who cannot attend the presentation, especially, employee benefits is a good example. Or if you're doing a lunch and learn like Derek mentioned, or doing some sort of training, recording it so that people could have access to it at a later date. That's also something that's really specific or really helpful. And finally, kind of as a post wrap up. So Emily mentioned we're going to be sending some information about Zoom after this call. So you'll most likely get a link to this presentation, as well as some other information that we've gathered to help you plan for these virtual meetings. And I know we're not pushing any one type of platform, but with Zoom, prior to this, we actually contacted Zoom directly, and they had a meeting with us. They had, of course, a Zoom meeting to go over some tips and tricks. And it was someone who works for Zoom for free, helped us out. And, I actually learned a lot from that. And I already felt like I knew quite a bit. So if you do have specific questions on whichever platform you're using, I would encourage you to reach out to the home office, or whatever you want to call it, the headquarters directly, and they have a lot of resources for you there.
And to piggyback off of Kate there, with Zoom especially, we set up a call, as she mentioned, to have them walk us through some of the advanced options with Zoom. The call was great. We got a lot of information. The follow-up was wonderful. I sent an email to the guy today. This was about a month ago. I sent him an email today. He got back to me within 10 minutes with an answer to my question. So I bring that up because they are very good with customer service, and they are ready, willing, and able to answer your questions.
I would say one thing too that I feel has been very helpful, because like Derek mentioned doing his presentations early on in COVID, I started doing in our office, like periodic webinars. So we'd bring on like a vendor or some other specialist in some field related to our business. And I would just basically do an interview with them and just talk about different stuff, kind of, talk about what they do, talk about what they're seeing, relate it back to, the audience and what they're looking to get out of it. And, for me, like I've always listened to a lot of podcasts, and it was really fun because I got to put on this podcast hat that like I've always been on the receiving side of it, and I got to be on the hearing side of it. And so in terms of making the most of those meetings, it sounds really basic, but go back to like high school or middle school where you learned about how to write an essay. What they always say, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you just told them. And that's really helpful because even though it's this virtual meeting, at the end of the day, you're still having a meeting. And so you need to provide some structure to it. You need to say, hey, we're going to cover X, Y, and Z things. Does that make sense? Cover X, Y, and Z things. And at the close, say, hey, we covered X, Y, and Z things. It sounds really basic, but that structure works really well because we've all been on presentations where they just jump into something and you don't have this bigger, like I'm a big picture person. I always want to know how this fits into the bigger picture. If you don't have that for people, they can kind of fall asleep. They can kind of lose track. They forget why it's important and how this relates to the whole. That's a really helpful way to get the most out of your meetings.
Does anybody else have any thoughts or insights about making the most of a virtual client meeting? As far as with your experience, kind of reception to people and how you're presenting stuff, translating what we said, translating what you normally put on paper to screen. I know there's some different programs, and we can kind of get into this about the different tools, but there is like ways that you can kind of have a whiteboard and those types of resources. Have you guys had any experience with that?
I would say since we started doing more Zoom meetings, it used to be if we would do a review meeting for, let's say a 401k client or an investment client, it would typically be, paper. And we didn't always take them through online because we've got a lot of older clientele. So I had to kind of come up with a way to translate paper to screen. And I think the easiest way that I found to do it was just a PowerPoint presentation, something that you can easily go through, hit the high points with them. And then either before, again, to John's point, sometimes we would send it before and say, hey, this is what we're going to be going through on our meeting, and send them the PDF so they have it. And then you go through the PowerPoint through the conversation. So that's something you're sharing your screen, it's translating that paper to the computer screen. And then, you either send it before or follow up. Hey, this is what we reviewed today. Thanks for your time. Just little touches you can do to keep that contact with the client if you're not physically seeing them.
And actually, one more piggyback on something John mentioned when he put himself in the podcast type role. Another thing that we did 6 or 7 times over the past 12 months was we would pay for a high-end chef, or we'd have a winery doing the Zoom meeting. So we had a chef from Italy 3 times host a meeting for us, and he did a cooking class, and it was just a wonderful experience. Our clients loved it. And without Zoom, we would have never had this chef from Italy be a part of anything that we do. So it's really opening up opportunities to work with other people in different areas of not only the country, but the world.
Absolutely. No, that's fantastic. Well, so kind of going off.
I have a funny story about that actually. So we did that. We did an internal cooking class, and everyone's adjusting. People weren't really aware of all the things they needed to do. And so we did a cooking class that was like some local place to our office, just sent us all the ingredients directly to home. And then we all were going to do it at home. So we get like a Home Depot like box that just has all this stuff thrown into it. And there's no packaging. There's no it's just like rattling around in there. And it's like raw shrimp, raw chicken, and like all the ingredients. And our employee in Colorado got the box, and it had been in like transit for 3 days. And so she opened up her box, and she had like this raw chicken and raw shrimp that had just been sitting there for 3 days.
No.
It was insane. So be aware of things. It's just, understand, yes, we're in transition. People are flexible with that. We've all been on calls where people's kids come out, and they laugh. And I think it's actually fun. Like, I think if I can tell another story really quick, one of our employees, I'm sure she's fine with me sharing this. One of our employees was diagnosed with cancer early last year, breast cancer. And so she's been going through her treatment and whatnot. So then with one of our clients, one of their key people, he was having some issues with his wife's cancer treatment. And so we got on the phone with her, me and my partner, and we're talking to her about all this stuff. And she's a little, she's wearing a beanie. She's been going through chemotherapy. She's a little self-conscious about it. And eventually she just says, screw it, I won't take this off. And so she says, is it okay if I'm bald? If I just have my real hair out? And then our employee goes, yeah, it's okay, I'll do the same thing. And then she takes her wig off. And so they had this really cool connection where it elevated the conversation, because it was this like, I'm there with you. I know what you're going through. Here's been my experience. They connected on a way deeper level. And that was all because of the ability to just be authentic, be themselves, and not kind of, keep this like veneer on of like, oh, I'm the like, insurance person or whatnot, and not being just honest with them, because people want to work with people who are like them and who they like. You got to get that across.
And and
I
that.
talked.
Oh, go ahead, Kate.
I was gonna say I talked about that. I did another NAIFA thing similar to this, and I feel like I think like the word voyeuristic is too much, because it makes it sound like we're spying on people. But even like our newscasters who like do the weather, I mean, like they do the weather from their living room. So you're like, oh, look, I didn't know that you were also a Boston Red Sox fan and the Denver Broncos. Like you learn things about people based on their backgrounds, based on what they have in their office and their trinkets and whatever. You get to know them on a deeper level. And I mean, that is an incredible story, John, but I think it's just given people kind of some insight into who people are based on what they see in this little box, which is something you don't get when you have a client meeting in your office.
Yeah, it makes you more human, I think. I mean, I know it's, sometimes for me, if I was having to do it at home, I'm at the office now, but I have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. And so they'll be fine playing independently. And all of a sudden I'm on a Zoom and it's like, I have a 3 and a 7-year-old behind my head. And so I think that you just have to go with the flow and kind of like, things are going to happen. And I think that clients like to see that you are a real person, you're a whole person. And so I wouldn't apologize for any of that, thing, for being a whole person. I just think it adds a depth, just to y'all's
Credibility.
point.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, yeah. And I was going to say, because there was a question in the chat early on, and I was going to kind of wait till we got a little bit further on, but it comes up now. Do you use a virtual background or not? And the 5 of us kind of talked a little bit beforehand, and this is who we are. This is, I see John's got, the places you will go behind him, and, it's that personality. And so I especially think kind of for our generation, we like kind of more that authentic self. And I do see more people that are older than us that are using the virtual background, because that's just kind of like the way that they've grown up in the business. They've evolved in their business, is, don't know anything about, who I am as a person. But I think, the generation of those of us that are on this webinar is, this is who I am. Kate, I'm going to pull you out for a second, but Kate's in Mexico on vacation right now. You would have no idea that she was, and but she's still able to.
It looks like Colorado,
right? Well,
Not anymore. You can't see the jungle. You can't see the jungle behind me. Like,
yeah, just the tree. But and so it's given us this opportunity, and I think that whole authentic self is a huge piece of what makes everybody a real person, and that you can do these things and be these things. And virtual background definitely has its place. When we had the congressional conference and we were meeting with senators and Senate staff, that definitely has its place. But it also has its downfalls as well. Because if you don't have a green screen, I was recording one of our NAIFA leaders once, and it looked like he was a unicorn, because the way that the virtual background was working with his background, he didn't have a green screen. And so we had to record it like 3 times, because this unicorn horn kept appearing on his head. And that's, obviously not the, yeah. Kate's a shark. So no, just another thing to kind of add to answer the question that was in the chat. So so I'm gonna go to John quick, because John, you talked about being a podcast at hosting or being a guest on a podcast, I should say, and talking about a digital presence. So what is a digital presence and how do you establish one?
Yeah, so it kind of ties into what we had talked about kind of throughout this, which is what kind of impression are you passing along? How are you coming across virtually? What are you saying about yourself? What are you saying about, how you are as a person? All those things, like that all comes across because it's so different. We're not sitting having coffee with someone, shaking their hand, looking them eye to eye and all that stuff. So it's really important that we think about how we come across, coming across authentically and all of those things, because that's how we're making people feel about, ourselves and whatnot. And so that's really key. And so that's where it gets into some of the virtual background stuff. I like having the background. I've spent a lot of time. Actually, we just moved into this office a few months ago, and my desk was in a totally different position. So I was going to be up against that wall. I was going to have all this light hitting me on the side. And I was thinking, if I'm on calls, then I'm going to have I'm going to look like Two-Face. I'm going to have this is going to be totally shadow and this is bright. And I was like, that doesn't make sense, because I'm sitting at the desk. I don't really care where the desk is when I'm working, but if I'm on calls, it's really important that I think about the lighting, because that's just going to make a difference for how I come across. So the digital presence was like putting the stuff behind me, putting some stuff on it. And I think it's kind of fun actually, because I've enjoyed doing the one at home where I've got a bunch of plants and a bunch of books and stuff. And then this one as well, people can pick and choose what they want to connect with me about. Is it the hockey stuff? Is it the Star Wars stuff? Is it the Charger stuff in the background, because I'm a Charger season ticket holder? Is it the Jim Collins stuff? I've got some NAIFA stuff back there as well. And then at home, it's interesting too. There's a guy who we're working with at a TPA, and he knows that I had a streetwear, like a street culture kind of figurine in the back that no one's ever commented on. That was kind of cool, because then we connected about something, and he's like, oh, they're having a drop next week and all that stuff. And that's a fun way for us to connect outside of talking about healthcare and self-funding and all this kind of industry stuff, right? It gives us another opportunity to have that kind of connection. And so digital presence is really key. You want to think about what you're saying, how you're coming across. That's just a key thing for how we're going to be received by people. And so we really want to manage that, because whether or not we're paying attention to it, it has an impact, right? And so if it's going to have an impact, you might as well be thinking about it and objectively assessing your own situation and then how that's going to come across. And then if you want to make tweaks to it, if you want to come across differently, make those tweaks.
I think it's important to note that in some regard, we all have a digital presence, right? I mean, if you Google your name, you're going to pop up in some form or fashion. So I think to your point, it's important to kind of, how do you want to come across? Exactly what you just said, because in today's day and age, I mean, you can avoid social media, you can avoid all those things, but we're out there, especially if you're on your company's website or something like that. So I think that's important too. Google yourself every once in a while. What pops up? I mean, it's kind of important to do those things. I think if you're using Zoom, if you're recording something, that can be saved, that can be put on your website. You can make short videos, you can do things like that. But I think we all, whether we admit it or not, we have a digital presence just by virtue of the world we live in.
Yeah, you need to have a working knowledge of how to use all that stuff. Because over quarantine, I figured out YouTube. I got a YouTube channel, and I'm not regularly posting to it, right? I'm not trying to be some celebrity, but yeah, if you have a conversation that's interesting, put it up on there. I'm using my Twitter more professionally now, so I'm not following some random stuff, but I am following, and it's actually led to interesting opportunities. I got to speak at a behavioral health tech summit 2 weeks ago because of some of the stuff that I was doing on Twitter. And so that's a really cool thing. It allows you to make some interesting connections, and it gives you some additional validity, like Rebecca mentioned. If someone Googles you and they find, John's on Twitter and he's talking to this person and that person, and there's stuff that's going on that's meaningful. I don't know if that's going to sell a case, but it does kind of build out the character that I have in some ways.
Well, let's face it, people are Googling you before they meet with you, right? I mean, they're Googling your company, they're Googling you, they want to see, who am I about to meet with, especially if it's somebody that you don't know. So it's really important to know how you're coming across out there before, they do.
Yeah, you'd hate for someone to say, hey, I Googled you and I found this thing out. You're like, what is that? You want to manage that as much as possible.
Absolutely. So what tools should you have to ensure virtual meeting success? I know we've talked about a bunch of them throughout this conversation here and there, but Derek, what do you find that you have used in your practice to be successful in virtual meetings?
Sure. Yeah. So one big thing is it's hard to keep someone's attention virtually. And it's also very easy to see when someone's attention is getting lost. So with that being said, it's always important to have something that's catchy, something that, entices these people to stick around and spend time hearing what you have to say. And I'm speaking more in terms of presentations as opposed to client meetings here. So having, again, going back to the PowerPoint, if you're comfortable using PowerPoint, it's so easy to share your screen. You just need to make sure that your message is exciting and you want people to take action really from what you're presenting. And looking back at some of the things that I do now, I always want to make sure that my internet's good. We logged in at 1:40 today to confirm, we're all here, we're all good to go. I logged in and my internet wasn't that good. I learned that quickly, and I learned that before the meeting got started. I made an adjustment and things are much better now. So again, it's going back to preparing for this meeting, just as you would prepare for an in-person meeting. You need to make sure you not only look the part, but you act the part and speak the part. For instance, I have my phone in my hand right now, but I'm not looking at it. If I'm down like this, it's very easy to see that someone is not paying attention to what you're talking about. Even though their ears may be open, they're not listening. So a big thing is making sure, again, you're not spending too much time getting into the weeds, talking about fine details. You want to keep their attention. So with that being said, there are other ways to entice people to spend more time. And I think the big one, again, is not utilizing too much time. Keep things short and sweet, but you also want to get your point across. And with that being said, there are also some other things that I'm going to put in the chat box for you attendees. There are links to different areas of Zoom for you to learn best practices, how to set up an account, simple tutorials, things like that. And yeah, with that, I will go ahead and pass it to everyone else.
Well, I'll say just in terms of tools, like tangible tools that we use. Okay, so John, I'm going to call you out here. I think you have an external camera, right? You look clearer than the rest of us. So my camera is built in my laptop. Elliot, that's my daughter. Sorry, Kate's using her tablet. Emily, is yours? Do you have an external camera? You do. Okay. So I just noticed this the other day. My dad, who's 73-ish, I should know that. Anyway, he got an external camera. We're both on the same Zoom call. He looks so much clearer. And his is an external camera with a light ring. I have a light ring in my office, which is why there's better lighting on me. So I would say light ring. And now I'm a firm believer in the external camera because I feel like it's clearer, it's crisper, especially if you don't have a laptop, for example. So those are just sort of little tools. You can get stuff that's super inexpensive. I think Emily said NAIFA sent out. Yeah, so she's showing a light ring. Little things like that your clients don't know. Although I will say, if I move this way, you can see the light ring and my TV behind me. So just be aware of that. So yeah, those are my little tools.
Yeah, I would definitely say, okay, first of all, the lighting, yeah, like it's hard to, I might have to unplug this to show you. I've got not a light ring, but it's on my desk. I've got this thing. So that way that gives me a little bit more consistent lighting. I'll plug it in later. And then for my office, yeah, I got a Logitech like streaming webcam. So it's like I could look it up and find it. It's like a C922 or something like that. There's a couple different variations of it. But actually at home, where I do the majority of the time where I'm on video, we took our DSLR kind of camera, right? It's a Sony a6000 or something. And I got some cords. I got like a cam link and some stuff that I needed to use. So I can plug that directly into my computer. It's like a camera that I would take out and do pictures, right? So like nice pictures. I plug that in and I use that through Zoom. And you can have a like dummy battery put into it. So it's not just going to run battery down. It's super easy. You can use it back to back. and it is like crazy. I mean, it's got like autofocus and all that stuff. It is really, really, really cool. So if you really think you're going to take this stuff seriously, and especially for me doing like YouTube videos and sharing them on LinkedIn, I wanted to have a little bit higher quality video there, because I'd done some on my iPhone, I'd done some through the camera on my computer, and it kind of looked like crap. It wasn't stuff that I was really happy to share. And so this stuff makes it just feel a lot better. So then I can really just focus on what I'm talking about and what I need to share. And I'm not thinking about the hardware.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my dad's 71, sorry. I made him older. He's probably really mad if he's watching this right now. Sorry, Dad.
Great. So Derek's putting some things in the chat as far as resources, and I will also take those on the follow-up email and include all those links into everybody as well. But, you know, I just thought that, oh, perfect. Thank you, Derek, or John. I wanted to let the attendees, you know, you guys have been great about asking questions throughout, but I just want to make sure that we, you know, sometimes it's hard when there's a lot of things popping up on chat. Sometimes we miss stuff. So I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to kind of ask some additional questions, things like that. So please use the chat feature, the Q&A feature, and we'll get to your questions.
One other thing I will say that I read this on something too, Emily, is, and I'm doing this now, but I'm not great at it, is they're saying if you really want to connect with somebody, look at the camera. I think a lot of us, we look at ourselves on the screen. I'm looking at all of you on the screen, and it doesn't look like I'm looking at you. So if you look at the camera, it makes a little bit of a difference. It's very awkward, but that's something that it helps you connect. The other person feels like you're looking at them. So that's one other little thing I would say.
100%. I would add
You can
piggybacking
also-
on, I was
yeah.
going to say, like, on top of that, because like I was on a call before this, we're on this call. I've got like 3 calls in the afternoon, and then I'm moderating the Lily program tonight for an hour and a half. So I'm going to be on camera for like 5 or 6 hours. It's exhausting. And that really, like, one of the weird things about that is actually seeing yourself is very tiring. And so at certain points you can turn off, you can actually click the little 3 dots over your video and you can hide self view. It takes you away. It still shows it still shows you to everyone else, but it prevents you from seeing yourself. And so that can be really helpful, because I sometimes get that just exhausted seeing myself talk the entire time. I'm like looking and like playing with my hair. It's very helpful to do that. It just kind of saves your sanity, frankly, being on a bunch of videos.
And I was going to say too, just in terms of adjusting the view, like I was on a Zoom call with our American Funds guy the other day, and, you know, I can make it so there's a speaker view, or I can pin the different views and everything. And so if you have that gallery view where you have everyone in the box, whereas if you have it just, if it's a smaller amount of people, I feel like it's easier to kind of have that, to mess with the views, to make sure that then you don't even know that you're not, you know, you're looking at the person through the camera when you can adjust the view differently.
Mm-hmm.
So if you typed a question in earlier and we did not get to it, please feel free to add it back in, because like I said, I think there was quite a few things coming in back and forth, and just want to make sure that we get to everybody. Everybody comfortable with how you actually do a virtual background? I know that's something that does come up occasionally. Since I'm in Zoom right now, the Zoom platform, you know, you click the arrow up next to where it says stop video, and there's an option for choose virtual background, and some different things will come up. And so this is last year's Belong event virtual background is the first one that popped up, but you know, that's something very easy to do.
Yeah, and somebody did ask about using virtual backgrounds, and I know we answered it, but I say if you don't have time to click, I had files behind me, I cleared them out, I put them on the floor, so you don't want to see my floor right now. But if you don't have time to do that, or you are in a space where it doesn't feel very private, absolutely use the filter, the background. There's the blur. I think sometimes it looks a little weird depending on, you know, how it is, but I think there is definitely a time and a place for a filter. 100%.
One thing to add to that, this was brought to my attention from the Zoom rep. You do need to have a certain processing speed to be able to utilize a virtual background, and I found out that I don't have that processing speed. I can change my filter, but I can't change the actual virtual background. So if you get to that point and it says you can't do so due to your processing speed, that is why.
All these helpful tips.
And I know I can't use them because I'm on a tablet.
Yep. So anybody, any other questions? Panelists, well, one thing that I will say, I know we've talked about Zoom a lot, and part of the reason why we're talking about Zoom a lot is because they are a partner with NAIFA, and NAIFA members are eligible for a 15% discount on a Zoom package. So you get, with the standard free Zoom, you get, I think, 35 minutes for a meeting. You know, there's different settings as far as recordings. This is set up as a webinar, obviously, so we can do the poll that we did at the beginning, have Q&A and chat. So there's different features with the different programs. Obviously, anybody can have a free Zoom account, but there are some additional benefits with that. And so to get that, there is a discount code that is available through the NAIFA member portal, and that's where you get that. But there is a 15% discount for NAIFA members. And they were, as we mentioned before, they were great to work with. When we told them that we're going to be doing this webinar, gave us a ton of helpful information. I think we all walked away learning something from that conversation that we didn't know. They learned some things. We were trying to explain to them, I can't remember what it was, but if something, and we're like, no, we don't see that. Like, you're not, you're on mute, Derek.
It was like we were trying to share a screen while sharing another screen or something
Trying
like
to share
that.
our Zooms so we could show how to share the Zoom screen as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say too, I told one of the advisors in our office that we were, what we were doing, what it was about. And I said, we're about everything you wanted to know about Zoom. And he said, why now? Like, almost like no one's using Zoom anymore. I'm like, because it's here to stay. I mean, it's exactly what John said to begin with. This is not going anywhere. I think clients find it more convenient. I give them the option. Do you want to, meet in person? I'll meet you somewhere. You can come to the office. They're like, can we just do a Zoom? It's more convenient for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. And that's why we're doing it. And the amount of people that I've encountered, in our local, I'm the youngest one. And so they're all older and some of them still don't know how to share their screen. So I think there is still a need for this conversation because it's not going anywhere. And that, is one of the reasons we wanted to set this up.
Yeah. And think about, we're all producers really for the most part. Think about the competitive advantage you have if you figure this stuff out. That's always been the biggest thing for me that's exciting about insurance, is the fact that it's such a slow moving industry in some ways, that there's such an advantage to first movers. This is such a good opportunity to, and I think we talked about it really early in the chat. We're not geographically fenced in for our businesses anymore, right? I don't need to try to be the best, employee benefits consultant in Santa Ana. I can be a really good employee benefits consultant to a lot of different kinds of companies, but I can really tailor that into a specific niche market. And this proliferation of online tools, I think, is a major advantage for the niche producers, the niche specialists in different kinds of markets, because you can just do one really specific thing really well for the right customer, because now you have a much bigger pool of potential customers to target. So I think that's really exciting, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys. This has been a fantastic panel. I hope that our attendees learned some things that they didn't know and can kind of help to, as we keep saying, Zoom's not going anywhere. It's here to stay. So how do you continue to leverage the technology that we have to build your practice, service your clients, all of that fun stuff. So thank you guys again, and look for the follow-up email coming out probably later tomorrow with these links, PDFs, all these things, all these tools that we've talked about, ways to help you. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks, guys.
attendees.
Thanks, everybody. Have fun in
Thank
Mexico,
you.
Kate.
Thanks.